Welcome to the Night Visitors. I'm James, your host and founder of the Night Visitors Vampire Research Society. What follows is a true account with names and identifying details changed to protect the people involved. Tonight's story occurred on Cape Cod in the summer of 1992 and was told to me by the woman who experienced the events firsthand. This account features what is commonly known as an energy or psychic vampire, which can be a living person, as is the case in this story, or an incorporeal spirit that feeds on a person's life force. This may not be a story of coffins, fangs, blood, and stakes through the heart, but it is nonetheless an incident of vampirism and energetic predation. Roxanne was 22 years old and living on her home island of St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands. She had no job, but she had recently been certified as an in-home health aide and caregiver. When she heard of a well-paid position on Cape Cod that included room and board, she jumped at the opportunity and soon found herself settling into a large house built sometime in the 1700s in Eastham, Massachusetts, at the end of a sand-covered road, completely surrounded by pine and oak trees without a neighbor in sight, unless you counted those buried in the crumbling graveyard that started just outside Roxanne's bedroom window. She had arrived in late June, and despite it being the brightest time of the year, there was always an enveloping layer of darkness and gloom that hung over the house, and the air was cold and clammy. From the moment she got there, she wanted to flee, but the bad job market and the promise of her first hefty paycheck made her stay. The woman she was to care for, Mrs. Campbell, looked to be approaching centenarian status. She was a tiny, frail woman with chalk-white hair and skin like tissue paper. On their first meeting, Roxanne sat at the edge of the bed while Mrs. Campbell held court like a geriatric queen. It was clear that she was raised in another time and she had no problem with treating people like servants. "I'm all alone, dear. I have no family or friends, and the time has come for me to admit that I need some help. I'm not looking for companionship. I keep to myself. I need somebody to clean the house and serve me meals when I require them, although I eat very little. Otherwise, you will be left to your own devices and can do as you wish, and if I need you for something, I will call." Roxanne smiled as she listened to Mrs. Campbell and wondered if the old woman expected her to curtsy and walk backwards when she exited the room. Mrs. Campbell was true to her word. She rarely bothered Roxanne and spent most of her time locked in her room at the back of the creaking old house where she slept most of the day. Even before Roxanne's arrival, the house was immaculately kept with not a speck of dust or a single item out of place. Another curious fact was that Mrs. Campbell never seemed to eat. Roxanne assumed that she would come out of her room at night and make herself something to eat, but in the morning there was never any dishes in the sink, and the cupboards and refrigerator were barely stocked. When Roxanne offered to prepare meals or bring her a plate of fresh fruit, Mrs. Campbell would grumpily dismiss her with a wave of her hand. Despite her obvious advanced age, she seemed to have a lot of energy. Her mind was sharp and her speech perfectly coherent and even at times elegant. That alone was the reason Roxanne didn't consult elder services about her lack of appetite and state of complete social isolation. That and the fact that Roxanne wanted to keep receiving her weekly salary as long as possible. The days passed in what Roxanne could only describe as an endless state of drudgerous tedium. She didn't have any friends on Cape Cod, so she confined herself to the house and spent most of her time watching talk shows. The desire to go out and explore and live life to the fullest that she had always had completely vanished. All she wanted to do was sleep, and after a while she began to neglect her duties and rarely came out of her room. Roxanne felt guilty, but Mrs. Campbell didn't seem to mind. Despite Roxanne's lack of effort, the house was always immaculate, and every Friday there was an envelope of cash left on the night table in Roxanne's room. She was happy to wake up and find money, but found it creepy that the old woman came in while she was sleeping. One day in early August, Roxanne woke at 4 p.m., having gone to bed early in the evening the day before. The hours seemed to have passed like smoke blown in the wind. Exhausted, even after that sleep marathon, she pushed herself up from the mattress and sat on the edge of the bed. The room spun around her, and she took a few moments to breathe deeply and compose herself. She looked out the window and saw Mrs. Campbell standing in the middle of the graveyard just outside the window. "Oh, this is it," Roxanne thought to herself. "She's having a senile moment, and I wasn't there to stop her from wandering." She summoned what strength she could and dashed out the door barefoot. The warm sand and dry summer grass tickled her feet as she ran towards Mrs. Campbell. "Oh, hello, dear," Mrs. Campbell greeted her with a smile. Roxanne gently took her by the arm, intending to guide her back to the house. "Don't mind me, I'm just tending my garden." "Maybe I should be the one to worry about you, sleeping all day," the old woman giggled, almost cackled. Roxanne looked around. In all the time she had been there, she had neglected to see that the cemetery was filled with flowers and even patches of gourds and pumpkins. Flowering vines wrapped themselves around the slate and granite gravestones of people dead well over a century. She had to admit that it was both eerie and beautiful. What was not beautiful was the icy grin that Mrs. Campbell was giving her. The initial frailty and air of helplessness that Roxanne had first seen in Mrs. Campbell were gone. She seemed stronger and more solid. Her skin had more color and elasticity, and there were even some streaks of dark brown appearing in her otherwise gray hair. She seemed to move quicker and clearly had the strength to care for this vast graveyard garden. "Well, the flowers are nice, you do a good job, but does the town or the families of the deceased mind you doing all this planting over the graves?" Roxanne asked, and Mrs. Campbell laughed. "This is my land, and the people buried here are mostly my family. This house has been in my family for 200 years, and I'm the last one left to care for it and for these graves. It's sad that this is the only family I have, but I try to make the best of it by planting colorful flowers all over their resting places. My favorite are the morning glories. No, they are considered parasitic vines and an invasive species. I find it beautiful the way they draw life and grow strong from the earth around them. They thrive in poor soil like that of wastelands and cemeteries. These creeping vines remind me of myself in a lot of ways. Like them, I survive the only way I can." Mrs. Campbell smiled, and Roxanne felt a chill run through her body. "You see, dear, life feeds on life, and death is just a part of that cycle," Mrs. Campbell continued. "Those who understand this can benefit from it in unimaginable ways. There was a time, not long ago, when people believed in unseen forces and hidden powers. But those days are gone. People are too busy with modern life to think of anything but themselves." Roxanne didn't know what to say. Either Mrs. Campbell was admitting to being some kind of dark predator, or she was spouting senile nonsense. "Let's go back into the house and I can make you something to eat." Roxanne tried to guide her back towards the house. "No, dear," Mrs. Campbell said sternly. "This is my time and my place. I won't be taken away from it." Roxanne walked back to the house, leaving Mrs. Campbell to tend her vines. She observed her elderly housemate for a time from her bedroom window until she fell asleep. In the days that followed, Roxanne became more and more weak and sluggish. She spent the majority of her time sleeping and felt exhausted after only minor physical efforts. On the rare occasions when she looked in the mirror, she saw a former ghost of herself. Her skin was pale and sagging, and her hair thinning, and despite the blazing summer heat and oppressive muggy air of August, she was always freezing. Over the span of 2 short months, she had gone from a vigorous 22-year-old brimming with energy to being exhausted after walking a few feet to the bathroom. Nightly, Mrs. Campbell haunted her dreams, and Roxanne would see herself entwined in the same vines that the old woman so carefully tended just outside her window. Roxanne knew she should see a doctor, but she never had the strength to make it out of the house. Mrs. Campbell, on the other hand, no longer confined herself to her room as she had done earlier in Roxanne's stay. She toiled for hours in her graveyard garden and scurried about the house filled with energy, baking muffins and pastries that she brought to Roxanne on a breakfast tray each morning, along with fresh squeezed juice. She looked younger in appearance, with her skin growing smoother, and even began to leave the house to run errands in nearby Orleans and Harwich. The roles of caregiver and care recipient had clearly been reversed, yet Roxanne continued to receive her weekly pay envelope each Friday. She knew it wasn't right to neglect her duties, but she simply lacked the strength to fulfill them. Roxanne had long decided that she needed to move on from this situation, but she never seemed to be able to rally herself enough to make it happen. The final straw came on Labor Day weekend when she awoke in the middle of the night to find a group of people standing in the graveyard around a roaring bonfire. She had no idea who these people were, as Mrs. Campbell had not had a single visitor in the 2 months Roxanne had been there. It was 1 a.m., and there had to be 10 or more people milling about the gravestones, laughing and chatting, illuminated by the fire and the full moon overhead. She could hear Mrs. Campbell talking to a man and distinctly heard her say, "I've done what I needed to with this one, and it's time to let her go. Everything must come to an end." "Of course," the man said. "Isn't this how these things work?" They both laughed, and it struck a chord of chilling fear deep within Roxanne. Was she to be the next sacrifice for Mrs. Campbell's coven of evil witches? It all made sense now. She had been brought there as prey, not as a caregiver, which Mrs. Campbell clearly did not need. Roxanne's instinct was to run from the house, but she lacked the strength to do so, and she fell back into a dark and dreamless sleep. Several hours later, Roxanne woke to find Mrs. Campbell sitting next to her on the bed smiling, both of them bathed in the bright morning light. She handed Roxanne what appeared to be a chocolate milkshake and an envelope filled with cash. "What is this?" Roxanne asked. "It's Monday. Payday isn't until Friday." "I know, dear, but it's severance pay. I think we can both admit you've done everything you came here for, and I'm no longer in need of your services. I've spoken to the employment agency that brought you here, and they've agreed to put you up in a cottage that they own in Truro until you find something else. This is a shake I made you. It has some herbs from my garden and will give you strength. Then you can be on your way." Roxanne looked at the chilled glass with condensation forming on it and wondered if she should take food from a vampire witch, especially made with herbs grown in graveyard dirt. But she decided to down it anyway. Almost immediately, she felt life and energy rush into her, and the weakness that had plagued her for 2 months suddenly subsided. Roxanne quickly packed and brought her luggage to the front porch and stood there waiting for her ride to the cottage. Mrs. Campbell stood in the doorway and Roxanne studied her closely. She looked to be no older than 60, a far cry from the frail ghost of a woman she had met only 2 months before. The car pulled into the driveway and Mrs. Campbell said to Roxanne, "I am grateful for all that you've done here. Truly I am. You've saved my life, quite literally. But I doubt that I will see you again, and we both know that's for the best. Yes, was all Roxanne could say, to which Mrs. Campbell responded with one of her haunting little giggle cackles. Roxanne rushed towards the car and quickly put the luggage in the trunk before jumping into the passenger seat and telling the driver to tear out of there as quickly as possible. She never saw Mrs. Campbell again and never wanted to, but she was always curious about who and what she had been living with that summer. She even considered going to the police, but she really didn't know what she would say and if there was even a crime committed at all. And certainly she couldn't tell them that she had been the victim of a vampire witch, which was the only term she could come up with to describe Mrs. Campbell. In the end, she figured it would be better to move on with her life. As soon as she distanced herself from Mrs. Campbell, Roxanne's health rebounded, and she regained the energy and youthful appearance appropriate to a 22-year-old. Roxanne no longer wished to work as a caregiver and instead took a job at a local bakery, which she greatly enjoyed. And a few years later, she started her own business as an event planner. Roxanne still lives on Cape Cod, and she has never run into Mrs. Campbell or heard anyone mention her. Years after the fact, when the internet became commonplace, Roxanne searched for any information she could find regarding Mrs. Campbell or the house she had lived in, and she found absolutely nothing. It was almost as if the enigmatic old woman never existed, but of course she had. And the experience of that summer left Roxanne with a healthy distrust of strangers and a strong belief in the supernatural. I'm not sure how to classify Mrs. Campbell. Based on the events described in this account, she is clearly an energy vampire. But she also seemed to practice occult rituals and maybe use gardening and herbal magic as a means of harvesting living energy. She was also clearly a predator. I personally know and have interviewed several energy vampires, some of whom I consider close friends, and they are kind and friendly people with a spiritual condition that requires them to take living energy in order to function normally and thrive. But unlike Mrs. Campbell, they only take energy from consenting donors. I hope you have enjoyed tonight's episode. If you'd like to share a personal vampire encounter, please contact me at thenightvisitorsthrs@gmail.com or on social media, and give me the chance to share your story here. Thank you for listening, and have a wonderful day or evening wherever you are in the world.